This is a summary of the second week of Patrick Lecture 6, The Human Role in the Spiritual and Material Universes. And in this section, I focused in the most part on the law of cause and effect, or karma. But there were a number of small nuggets in this collection, in this material, that I highlighted. It was filled with a lot of things. So I branched off in many directions. I started with the guide suggestion that you say a phrase and then notice what happens to you, what you feel, what you think, how you react, what your sensory recollections are, or that come back to you when you say it. And the phrase picks up from last week. It's about trust. And the phrase is, Father, thy will be done. Now, that particular phrase will generate a lot of religious doctrine, religious upbringing, cultural stereotypes that many of us can't avoid. They're there. And the idea is to find them, to say those kinds of words. This is what I believe, to say those kinds of words and see what happens, to see if we're still connected to the stereotypes or the cultural icons and to images of what this means. So in New Age modalities, they'll shift that higher power, divine create. They'll try to get away from the medieval quality of God as a figurehead, long beard, gray hair, strong, as the giver of all things, the punisher, the God of the Old Testament. But in Western civilization, this permeates everything we have had for thousands of years. And so it's important to look at that. So that's one. The second is that what I notice is that when reading through the lectures, there are places where it's important to take a break and do what the guide says so that you will get the next paragraph. And I use the study guides to enforce those pauses, to sometimes trim the material so that it's highlighting, say this meditation, do this thing, think this thought, before going on with the next. Of course, you can skip through it, but the idea is to create a different rhythm so that the lectures are digested in a slightly different way. It's how I have learned to study the lectures. Creating the study guides is my way of studying a lecture. So I go through and notice things and separate and subtopic. And then if it gels together, I might use it as a monthly topic. So that was the first exercise. And then I went into the teaching in this lecture on the law of cause and effect and karma. And I brought in the some materials from Pathwork Lecture 171, Spiritual Laws, and PC 10. Both of them were created by one of the original helpership training groups, and they wanted to codify spiritual law. And so they gave they would search through the lectures and give really good examples of all these different spiritual laws. The law of cause and effect and karma is, I'm going to say it's for adults only, meaning that it's not easy for children to understand the way the world works. As adults, we know that not everything is fair, not everything is right, not everything is reciprocated equally, that we have to take some care, that we have to watch out when we would like to be open and free. We may have to put boundaries out or take things more slowly, even get into an argument with someone because they want us to do something that we aren't comfortable with. We have learned that there's a cause and effect to being too open, to being too friendly, to being too willing. There's also a cause and effect to being too standoffish, too selfish, too focused on one's needs instead of the others. I frequently encourage people to look at children, because they are a simpler version of adults, and they represent to some extent the immature spirit versus the mature spirit. And I work with this in this way. The mature spirit is the real self. It knows it has something to work on, so it comes to this planet. To do so, it has to create a decision maker that will be fooled, that will go down certain paths because of the false beliefs, misconceptions, and distortions that the real self itself is holding on to and unable to release. And so it creates the ego self, but on the planet, it's easy to ignore the real self. And so the ego thinks it's in charge, thinks it's the only thing that has to be pleased, the only decision maker, the only recipient, the only giver. And so, like a little kid, we sometimes have to be disabused of that idea that we can always get what we want. We can always make ourselves happy. We learn through playing with others and through socialization processes involving cause and effect, that it's important to be aware of other people's needs, to share, to wait a bit longer for our reward, for our pleasure, because it will work better if we do. And I translate that into the real self-ego relationship, in that the ego carries the misconceptions most fully, and the real self knows there's a purpose in why we're here to manifest them, why we're here to make mistakes and learn. Let me phrase it this way. We're here to enact our false beliefs or have them enacted for us so that we can see why being out of alignment with divine law is not a good idea, why it produces pain and suffering. Now, if you don't believe that, then this won't make any sense, but perhaps you do. The idea is that when you are loving in the best way, loving, not giving everything away, but truly loving, that the other person will benefit and so will you, that the world will benefit and so will you. We will all benefit from pure, healthy, generous, loving thoughts and actions. That does not mean that you give things away or that you expect people to give to you. That's a kid thing. It's like when you divide food with a kid, they always want the bigger piece, or you gave her two and you gave me one, and that's not fair. This is not spiritual work. So when you get into spiritual work, the cause and effect can be separated quite a bit, and it takes a lot of realization and awareness and digging to be able to connect the dots over the decisions that we make and the outcomes that occur. So the ego's understanding is limited, and it's going to tend to put things together that don't belong together. There was a mention later in the lecture of superstition, and that's partly what superstition is. It's wanting to understand so badly that you put you see a kind of a corollary and you stick them together and claim that one always produces the other, rather than saying it may happen a percentage of the time or under certain circumstances. And then the last one is that spiritual language is picture-based. Human language may be picture generated in its thought process as a thought form. We may have some form of picture, but our language is very finite and very limited. So if I try to share with you my experience of a tree, I can describe it in extreme detail, but you're going to add your version of tree, your experience of tree, which will not be the same as mine. We can do a certain amount of work that way, but there can also enter misunderstandings, misconceptions, distortions, because I didn't spell it out. the children's program or series, Sesame Street, has this terrific segment that they would do. I was so enamored of Sesame Street when my children were young, is sometimes they would wander off and I'd still be watching. It was creative and fun. And they had this one segment where somebody would be willing to draw something if the kids would describe what to draw. And the kids would say, draw a circle, and they'd draw a little tiny circle. And the kids would say, no, a bigger circle. And of course, they'd be a big, no. Well, they'd finally get the size of the circle right. And then they'd want to add hair. And it's a way to teach kids that they have to be somewhat explicit, that they have to use their words, that they have to communicate what they want in clear language so the other person can understand it. It's a tremendous way to understand why misunderstandings are created. So summary, hope you read the lecture. It's fascinating. The early lectures are quite a potpourri of topics and facts. Later on, this lecture could spawn 20, 30 lectures because each topic might be examined in greater depth. Hope you take a look at it, and thanks for watching.